Good morning and welcome to the Dean's Forum. I'm Richard Lawson, Dean of St. John's Cathedral. And our guest this morning is Dr. Catherine Meeks from Atlanta, Georgia. Dr. Meeks is a retired professor of Wesleyan College. She is the host of a wonderful podcast called Brave Space that's available on iTunes and I suspect a couple of other platforms or providers. Dr. Meeks is an author. My favorite book of hers is called Living in God's Dream. She's also a fantastic storyteller and currently is the executive director of the Absalom Jones Center for Racial Healing. Welcome, Dr. Meeks.
Thank you. It's so very good to be here this morning with you.
It's very good to be with you, and I've been looking forward to this a long time, and for a number of reasons. Before I say a prayer, as a Southerner, I cannot resist asking you, is it spring in Atlanta, Georgia?
Not yet, but it's telling us that it's on its way.
What are you smelling and seeing? How do you know that?
It's warmer, and when spring is in the air, there's just something about the way the air feels, and I've been having that experience with the sun shining and warm and the birds singing more. So it's coming pretty fast.
That's just wonderful. The weather here in Denver is glorious, and I love all the seasons here. The only season I miss from the South is spring, because as you know, it's splendid.
Right.
Well, listen, good morning. Welcome. I'll say a brief prayer and we will dive in. The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Let us pray. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful people and kindle in us the fire of your love. Amen.
Amen.
Dr. Meeks, as you know, we've got lots of questions. There's a for you, and we've a lot of interest in your visit. And so the first thing I'm going to say to our guests and everyone who is following us, in some ways, I'm going to try to move a little more quickly, and I know you're going to try to go deep quickly as well, because we just have so many good questions. Where I'd like to begin is I would love it if you'd tell us a little bit about the Absalom Jones Center and the work that it undertakes.
Of course, I'd be very delighted to say that. First of all, the website is centerforracialhealing.org, so people can go there and really investigate us more. We became a center after my leadership for the beloved community commission for dismantling racism that existed precursor to the center. I led that group for 8 years, and we outgrew ourselves as a commission and decided, along with Bishop Wright's blessings, to petition the presiding bishop about establishing a center that would offer services for the entire church. And that's how this came about. We are a collaborative partnership between the Diocese of Atlanta and the presiding bishop, and we have the responsibility to reach out across the entire Episcopal Communion to try to help people in doing their racial healing work. We're situated in Atlanta, Georgia, across the street from the Atlanta University Consortium, which is a collection of historical Black colleges, which is a wonderful place for us to be, because we have access to a campus community. And we are also situated in an impoverished African-American community. So it gives us that constituency, the campus, plus the diocese, and then the province, and then the United States. So we have a handful of work in front of us, and we are 3 years old and thriving, and we are encouraged by the amazing support we've gotten over these past 3 years.
That's remarkable. And just very briefly to say, thank you so much for making time for us. I'm very aware of your calendar. and your the work of the center. So thank you. You, I know this from your books and following you online. You've got a really interesting approach to racial healing in terms of, I mean, the lenses that you bring to this. And I'm very aware that one of your lenses, if you'll forgive that as a metaphor, there are probably better images for it. One of the ways in which you see this work and the spiritual life in general is based on your background in Jungian analysis.
Right,
of all
right,
things.
right.
And the cathedral here, if it's helpful to know, especially Wallace and Jean Cliff, God rest their souls, were former clergy here, were both Jungians. So it's
wonderful.
That's the air that we breathe a little bit here at the cathedral,
Yeah.
and they were wonderful priests. Number two, your academic work, your PhD, and your history in the academy. And then third, and just as importantly, and in some ways maybe more importantly, the gospel. You're a faithful Episcopalian and Christian. Will you talk briefly about how you combine those three viewpoints?
Yeah, it's really a fascinating journey. I never set out to really learn about Jung. That I was brought to Jung as in the course of my spiritual journey, and also brought to the Episcopal Church because of the Episcopal community's willingness to engage Jungian thought. All of the workshops on dreams and other kinds of issues that I went to were hosted by Episcopal churches before I became an Episcopalian. And so, excuse me, thinking about a church that would be willing to embrace such a set of ideas by hosting events around this person led me to the conclusion that I would like to be a part of this church. So Jung, doing the Jungian work, really led me to becoming an Episcopalian. And it really was a delight to find a religious community that is capable of allowing you to think deeply using other genres to help you understand the faith journey, instead of just saying, go do this and go do that, without any kind of a foundation for interrogating, how do I get there? What's the process? We tell people to be forgiving, but where do we teach classes on how much inner work you've got to do, how much forgiving you've got to do of yourself before you're capable of forgiving anybody else? We don't talk about what is the process. We're always being told what the product is. I'm supposed to love you as I love my neighbor, but do I really understand what love is? And do I really understand the hindrances to really loving people that might be inside my own self, what I call the inner community? What's in my inner community that's keeping me from doing these things that I've been told I'm supposed to do and be because I'm a Christian? And Jung helps me to understand the process. Some people get confused and think, well, Christians don't want to engage like Jung because they say Jung wasn't a believer. Actually, Jung was probably more of a believer than a lot of folks who are sitting in church, because he just went so deep into the unconscious and the other side of reality. And he came out saying, no, he wouldn't say he believed in God. He would say, I know that God is there, which is much deeper than belief. So I'm so grateful for that lens that helps me make sense out of my experiences. The little girl growing up in Arkansas with an illiterate father and a sharecropping father and mother who graduated from college the same year that I graduated from high school. That world is a part of me. And then this other world of being the professor, the scholar, the person who understands the history and the psychology and all that stuff. And then my faith in Jesus that has been growing since I was a little kid. So, you get all that stuff in yourself, and then what do you do with it? And it doesn't do you any good if you got it all in a lot of little compartments. You've got to learn how to have it be integrated and empowering. And Jung really helps me with that.
That's incredible. Thank you so much. And I'll just say for our viewers, if they find it helpful, Wallace Clift, the Priest of Mention has a wonderful introduction to Jungian thought. And I think, Dr. Meeks, I would say from my simple viewpoint, what you're saying, the bridge between Jung and Christianity is he believed the spiritual realm is real.
Mm-hmm.
It's real.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also inside us and it's outside us. So that's a part of what that bridge is. Dr. Meeks,
and what he said, excuse me a second, but let me just add this. What he said was, it goes way beyond belief for him. It went to actual knowing, because of, in his place where he spent a lot of time learning and exploring. There was no electricity. It was a rustic place that he spent hours and hours and hours there, delving into the unconscious and being engaging in that world. So he came out in a deeper place than most people have the courage to even learn about, let alone go into.
In your work, you often use the term racial healing.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Because healing implies, first of all, wound, and second of all, that there's a process that you can go through to get from where you are to somewhere else. And what I've replaced is reconciliation at the end of racial, because I don't believe that there's anything to reconcile between First Nations people and African Americans in this country. I think that what was done to both groups of people is traumatizing and wounding, and there were no real relationships. There was no possibility of real relationships when people were being viewed as second and third and fourth class human beings. So in order to have real relationship, you've got to have people having mutual respect for one another and seeing one another as equal human beings. I mean, we have different relationships with our kids than we do grown people, but we respect our children. We don't see them as little third-class human beings, which is what happened with First Nations people and African Americans. So there is nothing to be reconciled. We have got to heal the wounds. We've got to heal the denigration, the dehumanization. And it's way deeper than just saying, oh, well, we can get together and just say, yeah, we're brothers and sisters. I mean, we're Christians, and we'll just erase all of that stuff that wounded us. We'll act like that didn't all happen, and we're just going to go off down the road, arm in arm, singing Kumbaya. It doesn't work. It hasn't worked. It isn't working. And so I think we need to step back and say, let's dig deeper. Let's get at what the real wound is. Let's clean it out. Let the air shine on it so that we can begin to get well.
I know you're familiar with Brian Stevenson's work, the Alabama and now celebrated author, and the film Just Mercy about Brian Stevenson, his work in Montgomery, Alabama, and in the state of Alabama and nationally. I've heard Brian Stevenson say that if we don't do the work of memory, of remembering, if we don't do things like memorialize lynching sites, for example, or the slave trade, with plaques, memorials, all of that. If we don't do that, what I heard him say once in Memphis is we'll be haunted by these ghosts for the rest of our lives. Is that a part of what you mean by we can't just start from scratch, so to speak? We can't just sing Kumbaya and begin again right now. Right. Is that a part of it, the role of memory in relation to healing?
Absolutely. And the first thing that I hear from white people, particularly, and sometimes people of color, well, let's just go on. It's like, let's just erase the last 500 years and just say, here we are, here you and I are, so we can start here. Well, that's a great notion. The problem is it doesn't work. Because eventually, whatever your story is, whatever your narrative is, it's going to come and stand up in the middle of the relationship. And if you haven't begun to interrogate that history, that story, that narrative, then you get shocked and you don't know what to do with yourself when the history shows up. You cannot live an ahistorical existence, not individually and not collectively. And we've been trying to do that. We've been trying to act like Well, if we just start with, well, look at where we've come. We've had a Black president now, and we're supposed to be okay. Well, no, we're not, because we still don't want to ask the right questions. We don't want to dig into the root systems in the way that we are going to have to. So that's why at the center, we say the Center for Racial Healing is a brave space where the truth can be told in a compassionate and loving way, but yet we'll tell the best truth we can tell every time we speak, because that's the only way. As Jesus said, if you know the truth will set you free. And I totally believe that.
Well, speaking of asking good questions, we've gotten a lot, as I mentioned earlier, and I'm gonna tuck these in here and there for the rest of our conversation. And I think there's one that's pertinent to ask right now, and it comes from Michael McKee, who is a member of the parish and a member of our Faith in Action Commission. Is whiteness an invention that implicitly denies one's origins? What's your academic take, or just your take in general on racial category, whiteness as a racial category?
Well, race period is an invention. I mean, it's because there's one race and we're all human beings, and we're the ones that set up these other categories and then assign values to them that support the political systems that we wanted to have. So it's difficult to understand race as an invention when we look at people and they're different, and we use that to talk about their differences. But when you get right down to the genetic constructions, they're not differences. There are not the differences that we have made them out to be just because somebody's skin color is different or their hair is different. So when you think about that, we've invented this categorizing process using race, and then used it to denigrate and marginalize and control and oppress people. You get back to, well, why do we need it in the first place? If we were able to just look at people as God's beloved creation, that would make such a big difference, because everybody, as near as I can tell, has been made by God. I mean, I don't think that, anybody's managed to create themselves. And so I think that it's a big mistake. The value that we put on race, the weight that we put on it in terms of trying to understand who somebody is. When you look at me, I do want you to see that I'm a Black woman. I don't want that to become a reason for you not to open your mouth, not to say hello, not to be curious, not to want to know what is this iteration of God that's standing in front of me in a Black body bringing to this conversation. There's a complete difference from looking at me as a Black woman and then deciding, oh, well, I'm not going to quite know how to talk to her because what do I know about Black women? Or for me to say, well, I don't know how to talk to Father Richard because what do I know about white men? No, this is an iteration of God standing in front of me in a body with skin that we call white. That's all I need to know. And then I need to go on to, so what's his heart like? What's his reason for being? Who is he? How is he manifesting God in the world? And that should interest me more than what color you are.
And I'll try to just summarize that, because what you just said is very profound, and we could honestly spend the rest of the class talking about it, because I'm sure you've heard, as I've heard a lot of white people say, I've progressed to such a degree that I don't see color. Yeah. That is not at all what you or I are suggesting.
No.
We want to remember the biblical notion of creation, that we are all of the same blood, of the same father or mother in heaven. And at the same time, there's a diversity of experience and history and memory and trauma and joy and all of that. So in part, what you're talking about is paying attention to difference. Mm-hmm. Is that fair?
Nobody who says I don't see color is telling the truth, period. Because when you look at me, you gotta see that I'm not pink, I'm not purple, I'm not green, I'm brown. You gotta see that. When I look at you, you're not red, you're not yellow. So it's unnecessary to say I don't see color. And I understand when people say that, what they're trying to say is I'm not going to let your color keep me from trying to see who you are, trying to be a neighbor, trying to love you, whatever. I get that, but they need to stop saying I don't see color, because you can't help it. I mean, unless you're blind and you can't see the person. So I think that what we're trying to say is I see what color you are, but then I know that God lives in you, and that interests me more than your color. That interests me more. Who are you? Who are you? What are you doing here? How do you see things? How can we walk together in this world to demonstrate God's love? Those are much better questions, I think, than, where did you go to school, and where do you live now, and all these external things that we get so caught up in, so we know which box to put somebody in.
I've got another question for Michael McKee, and Michael is an important leader here at the Cathedral because he's on this Faith in Action Commission.
Right.
I think it might be important to say, before I tell you what his question is on this one, Michael is an African American, and one of his questions relates to what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
Michael asks, because I know you're trying, Dr. Meeks, to create a brave space for people of all color and white people to be able to be honest, self-aware, and to go on a journey.
Mm-hmm.
And Michael's question here is, what guides or what suggestions do you have for white people so that they don't insult when they are reaching out to the other? And that's a hard, I think that's a hard question, because you're trying to create this brave space where everyone is honest. But Michael is asking rightly, how can white people be, frankly, self-aware and also create the space for those conversations by the language they use? So how can they be both open and self-aware?
Well, I think you answered the question. It is about self-awareness. It's about thinking before you speak. It's about listening. It's about getting off the superiority horse to think that you can just say anything. I've heard white people ask questions of Black folks that I feel pretty certain they would not have asked another white person. But there's this sense of agency when you're talking to people of color, because on some level inside of your head, there is still this hierarchical notion of your being superior. And so that you can ask this question that's invasive, or say something that, so it boils down to becoming more self-aware and thinking before you speak, and thinking how you would feel if somebody asked you that question or made that comment to you. It's like when some of my friends who come from West Africa have said, they've been in groups with white people who asked them if they lived in trees. Well, that's really, if you're a halfway thinking person, you would know better than to ask somebody that. And if you wondered about that, you'd go Google it anyway, so you could have your own answer without having to ask the person. So I just feel like that some of those microaggressions come from unconsciousness and thoughtlessness, and a kind of inherent notion of superiority, even in white people who are trying to be progressive, because you got to get whiteness off the throne. It's got to become a second level, third level as you work on getting it out of your system, so that you begin to see, hey, this is an equal person to me. When we hear comments in the African American community that white people will say somebody's articulate or somebody is really so intelligent, as if they're in shock about it, and they think that they're being complimentary, and we think we're being insulted. So, but you stop and think about, why are you thinking how articulate Henry Louis Gates is? Why wouldn't he be articulate? Why wouldn't I be articulate? I have a PhD from Emory. So that's all, you don't need to say that I'm articulate is to be redundant, because I'm an educated person, and it's unnecessary to say. What you need to say is that I heard that person speak and I was so inspired. And I think a lot, or so disturbed. I think a lot of times when people say things like Black and brown folks are articulate, what they're basically saying is they really had an impact upon me, but they don't want to talk about that. So they go with describing the brilliance of the person rather than saying, they really disturbed me, or I was so inspired, or I was scared or mad or whatever. But most folks aren't sitting around trying to give white folks the benefit of the doubt about all this. We just like, get over it. Stop saying those kinds of things about us and to us, because it feels demeaning in a way for you to say that. You say, I came and preached at your church, and I want people to say they were inspired, or they were moved, or they were troubled, or they hated me, but I don't want them to talk about that I was articulate, because that's an insult.
Thank you for that. Michael McKee, also the same person, asks a related, but it's the flip side of that previous question. He asks what your advice would be for people of color who are members of St. John's Cathedral when they hear white members of the parish say things that, and how not to just, in Michael's words, feel so much shame or lambast the other person as a disingenuous racist.
Yeah, it doesn't do any good to do that. And you go to church together, so you got to talk to each other a little bit differently from that. People don't respond well to accusations, even when they're wrong. So I think you can, it depends. It depends upon how you're feeling that day and what you can manage. If it happens on a day when what you really want to do is slap someone off the continent, the best thing to do is to do nothing. If it's on a day when you've got some bandwidth for being compassionate and trying to be teacher or representative of Jesus in the ways that we're supposed to be, then God will give you the right words to say to the person, because it does need to be spoken to. And even if you don't have what it takes that day, it might be, depending on who the person is and what your relationship is to them, it might be a good thing to take it up later in writing to them, or calling them up and inviting them for a conversation or whatever. This is a deeply personal kind of matter, because every day people of color have to make decisions about how much they're going to take in microaggressions, how much energy is going to go to the microaggressions that are going to come my way. And some days you've got more energy for it than others. But if it keeps on being, keeps on bothering you, then you've got to deal with it. You don't get to just try to act like it didn't happen. And if it's somebody that you're in relationship with, you got to deal with it, because it's just going to get worse. My son says it's like when somebody doesn't do the toothpaste tube right, and you try to let it go and let it go and let it go. And then one day you just have this explosion that doesn't even make any sense, because it was about toothpaste being on the face bowl or something. But it was really that you've been mad for 6 months because they keep messing up the toothpaste tube and you never said anything. So it is important to speak up, but you got to be in the right place to speak up, so that your speaking up can really be heard.
Do you mind giving us, just in case someone doesn't know, a quick definition of microaggression?
Microaggressions are these daily little insults that oppressed people live with, that come from the oppressor, and sometimes come from within the group itself, because people learn to be oppressed. People often take on characteristics of the oppressor, which we call internalized oppression. When you start acting like what the oppressor is saying to you about you is really true. And it's things like, like I was talking about earlier, a highly educated person being characterized as being articulate. That is an insult. It's like telling a brain surgeon that he knows how to do surgery. really. I mean, he's a brain neurosurgeon, so what do you expect him to come and trim your toenails? So it's the surprise, the dealing with Black and brown people in a way of always kind of reflecting surprise at us being who we really are, because you didn't take any time to find out who we really are. And then the other really painful things of just being denigrated, being overlooked in a line, being asked for 3 pieces of ID when the white person in front of you wasn't asked for any ID. Those kinds of, I mean, being stopped by the cops when you didn't do anything and knowing you might end up dead, even though you were innocent, because of, it just depends on which way the whole thing goes. So it's all that kind of stuff that's a part of that whole fabric of microaggressive behavior, because it's a kind of subtle, like pinprick all day, or if not all day, a lot of the time in a week. You could sit down and say, how many times did I feel marginalized or made invisible? Somebody white saying something that indicated they didn't see me or didn't think that they had to think about what they were saying because I didn't matter.
Thank you. We've gotten some more questions, so I'm pausing for a minute, which also allows people to digest how much you're offering for us. And I just cannot thank you enough for how quickly you're getting us there. Just thank you so much. You're very generous.
Well, you're welcome.
One of the questions, and I am pausing because I've got a couple coming in from different directions. One person who is a person of color and a member of the parish has asked for advice on how they should respond when when a white person says, "I'm not racist." Do you have any just helpful advice there?
Well, the very first thing I would ask the person the white person who says that to me is, I would ask them, well, what is a racist? What do they mean by they're not racist? What is the body of behavior that they have attributed to being racist that they want me to understand that they don't practice that? So I need to know how they're defining racist. It's interesting. It's difficult I'm sure, for somebody white to sit down and say, I'm a racist. But the truth is, you may be a progressive person who's trying to stand against the system of racism, systemic racism in this country. But you do need to understand that because you are a white person, Black and brown people looking at you will identify you with the system quicker than they're going to identify a Black or brown person. And even though you may be really ready to overthrow the system and change everything, you still have to make explanations about yourself. And saying I'm not racist doesn't help. What the best thing that you can say is that I'm standing against this system of racism, and I'm trying not to be complicit with it. Because that's really what white people, I know no white person wants to be labeled as a racist and accept that as a title or something. But basically, you have to understand your complicity and the appearance of your complicity. And it takes a lot of public resistance to really change that narrative. So I think that the Black person or brown person hearing that from somebody white should start with asking them to tell them what a racist is. What do they mean by that? And how do they see themselves standing against systemic racism? And one of the things we have to get away from is judgment. And Black and white folks together as people of faith in your parish, in your cathedral, have got to be willing to be sisters and brothers to one another, and to really take a stance of, I'm going to give you some space. I'm going to give you a chance to be a human being, and I'm going to be in this with you. And because we can't be on the sidelines throwing rocks at each other, kind of trying to figure out how to be together, but kind of being adversaries. We can't be adversaries. We just got to make up our minds to be in it, and to be in it completely. And it's painful, and we have to be vulnerable. And some days we don't want to do it, but it's about being the people of God. And I've been knowing this now for a very long time. And thank God that there've been white people sent into my life that have helped me to make the true commitment to being in the journey with white folks, and honest, willing to be honest and tell the best truth I can tell. And that is what people of color have to do. Tell the best truth you can tell and be loving and kind. And white people have to tell the best truth they can tell in a loving and kind way, with an openness to hear the truth too, without having to try to defend themselves, and to just pay attention. It's hard. I know it's hard, but it's so necessary.
I want to ask, I want to pair two questions that are related for you. Let's talk about narrative. Let's talk about stories.
Mm-hmm.
This is a huge part of your work.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to think that storytelling is underrated in this culture. And I don't know if people think stories are just kind of weak and not political enough. I don't know what it is, but I think it's underrated.
Mm-hmm.
Why are stories, personal, all types of stories, so important to your work? Actually, I'm gonna give you three questions. What are the kinds of questions you would encourage us to ask personally in order to sift through our own memories in relation to race, and to get at our own personal stories and memories? And then third, what's a gospel story that you come back to again and again in relation to racial healing?
Well, first of all, I think stories are so critical, because when someone is telling you their story, you get to see how they feel, how they think, how they are, and how they go through the world. And you get to listen, and you don't have to do anything but listen deeply to what they're saying and see how it strikes you. You don't get to edit. You don't get to try to clean it up for them. You don't get to explain things. You just get to listen. And I think that to tell you the real truth, that part of the reason why we don't want to engage in storytelling is because we don't like to listen. We always want to be telling folks what we know, instead of listening with our hearts and heads in ways that help us to see sometimes beyond what the person is even saying. And then the second thing, to the second part of your question, I think to ask, each of us needs to ask ourselves, how did I get here? How did I get to here today? What was the path? What did people say to me? What did I learn from my environment, from school? How come I think the way I think? How much time do we spend really looking at ourselves and saying, why do I think this way? And is this the way does the rest of what I know support this way of thinking? If I'm sitting in my house somewhere saying, well, white people can't cook, because that's what one of the things African Americans would say about white people, because we were always the ones cooking your food. Well, the truth is, there are many white people who can cook, and who can cook very well. So I grew up as a little girl hearing white people can't cook, right? But now that I'm a grown up and I've got these friends who cook fabulous meals, am I still going to say white people can't cook? Or am I going to say, maybe there's some white people that can't cook, there's some Black people that can't cook either? So what is the way that I am living in the world, and how is that way borne out by what I know now? Is it being reinforced, or is it being challenged? And what are those challenges? And what do I need to do about it? How did I get here? What propelled me down this road? What are the narratives that energize me, and and keep me thinking this way? And am I thinking this way on my own, or is this the way my grandmother thought? and my mother and my aunts and uncles, and I've just sort of taken it on for myself. But is that what I really think? Is that how I really feel? Spend time with those kinds of questions in the self-interrogation process, which I think is critical, because it's out of that energy of those narratives that we end up being who we are and going out into the world and finding energy that reinforces us. And we have to be always asking, what is it? Where did it come from? Why am I holding on to it? Why can't I let it go? You know, when I find myself just hanging on to something, I have to say, why? What is this about? Why can't I let this go and go on to whatever else I need to go to? And now I forgot the last question. The
gospel story.
Oh, the gospel story. I think that the gospel story that I have gone back to so much here of late is Jesus at the pool of Bethsaida with the crippled man who couldn't get into the pool when the angel was troubling the waters, and Jesus asking him, do you want to be healed? For me, that perhaps is the most profound question for me to ask myself, for anybody to ask themselves. I think it's a question the church needs to ask itself. Do we want to be healed? And if the answer is yes, then God, what do we need to do? And I just was saying yesterday to a group of people, I think that I hope and pray that if the church asks that question, and I mean the kind of big church now, not just the Episcopal church, I hope the answer would be yes, we want to be healed. And then we will have, if we truly believe that, then we can have the courage to say to God, so what do I need to do? What do I need to do? And Jesus, you know, I think that when you think about this, you know, this man is saying, I've been here all these years and I've never been able to get in this pool. And basically nobody's helped me. He's whining, really. And Jesus is saying to him, why are you whining? Do you really want to be well? And then if you really want to be well, is this the best answer you can come up with for yourself? You know, this is not victim blaming here. This is about taking responsibility. And so I've just, the more I've thought about that story, I just hear the brilliance in it from Jesus Christ. Because I would have been with the guy ranting about how people weren't being kind and why didn't they help him? And Jesus didn't get into any of that extraneous stuff that we would have gotten into. He just basically went to the core. Do you want to be healed? And I ask myself that. I have rheumatoid arthritis. So every day I have to say, do you really want to be healed? Then that means, do you really want to be well? That means I've got to exercise. I need to get in the water. I got to be careful about what I eat. I need to sleep enough. That's the rest of the answer. But you got to get clear about the first answer. So that passage has just been, it has become a companion in a way that surprised me. I mean, there are other things that the cloud of witnesses part of Hebrews 11 really is something else for me. I have Ida B. Wells and Fannie Lou Hamer and Sojourner Truth and Mary McLeod Bethune and my mother and Harriet Tubman on my wall at the center as a part of my cloud of witnesses. So that's the other scripture that just sort of leaps out of the Bible at me as I have thought about who are the cloud of witnesses that I have to be accountable to on a daily basis. And when I look at those women, I am held up by them. And then one other quick thing I want to say is at the center, we have a monument that lists all the names of all the people who were lynched in Georgia, because we went through a process of remembering all of the folks who were lynched in the state of Georgia, and it's over 600 of them. And we have this piece of granite with all their names on it. So that's another group of witnesses that I feel beholden to. And which means that, you know, I don't get to mess around in a day because I look at the resources I have and look at the responsibility that comes with those resources. When I look at those women on my wall, none of them would have ever imagined that you could be who I have become. None of them would have had that sense, given the histories that they had to deal with. So those two, do you want to be healed, and the great cloud of witnesses, really do kind of frame the days every day for me in some very important ways.
I thank you. Thank you so much. And just as a transition to our last couple of questions that I'll bundle together. Well, we have many, but I bundled them together into two. I know one of your cloud of witnesses, and mine too, is Barbara Harris. God rest her soul. And for our viewers, Barbara Harris was the first woman. I mean, it's amazing. The first woman bishop in the Anglican Communion.
Yes.
Person of color from Philadelphia. Was present a couple of years ago at our bishop's consecration here at the cathedral. The only person, Dr. Meeks, in my life that I've been around that I wanted to meet so badly, and I got so nervous that I couldn't even introduce myself, which I regret. I was just so in awe, and I don't mind telling you, with everybody watching, she was smoking a cigarette on the front steps of the cathedral, and just entertaining. It was phenomenal. But God rest her soul. The reason why I'm bringing it up, though, is if anybody wants to get on your podcast, Dr. Meeks did the last recorded interview with Barbara Harris. And it's spectacular. So if you get the Brave Space podcast, check out especially Dr. Meeks' interview with Bishop Harris.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that.
Okay, in our remaining time, and of course we're running out of it, I'm going to bundle together questions that all have to do with St. John's Cathedral, which is a parish and a cathedral for the diocese. And basically, these are all questions about how can we go further on the road toward racial healing. They all sort of fit on that. And you'll not be surprised to know some of them are more philosophical and a lot of them are more practical, like what can we do? The first thing I want to ask you, just if you'll give a quick response to it, I hear in your stories, your time today, and in your books, you advocate for brave spaces that are of all different sizes and types, from conversations at coffee hour to who you sit with in the pew, to who gets elected to the vestry, to how racially diverse your cathedral is, to your staff is, to the advocacy statements you make about pressing political injustice issues. You seem to advocate for creating that brave space on all those different scales. Is that fair?
Absolutely. In addition to that, then what are the sermons? What is going on in the spiritual formation hour? What kinds of programmatic things are being done in the parish? Every bit of parish life has to be impacted by an understanding of the commitment to racial healing, and to understand it as a part of our spiritual formation rather than understanding it as our struggle for social justice. We have, I think, totally misunderstood what this is about. That it's about being who God put you on the earth to be, and trying to be well, to understand that people that we have othered have got to be brought into the family, inside of ourselves and inside of our church houses, and that we don't get to play this game of, oh, let's go out and do a little something for social justice so that Black folks can have a little higher wage or a little this or that. It's not about that. It is about opening up your heart to invite with genuine hospitality all that we have considered to be other than ourselves.
Let's see, Dr. Meeks. I am not sure if I am frozen or if you are. So as I am awaiting some technical help,
God. And we're back.
oh, good. I apologize. I didn't know if I was frozen or if you were.
Yeah, we both were for a minute. Anyway, I was just saying that all of this work is about spiritual formation.
Mm-hmm.
It is about us becoming who God put us on the earth to be. And if we take it that way, we can, in the first place, people in the pew can leave the priest alone about preaching about this, because it is about spiritual formation. We're so quick to say, that's political and we don't want to talk about politics from the pulpit. That's a game we need to quit playing. We are God's people on this earth to do God's work. And we need to start seeing it that way and stop splitting it up into little pieces to take it in the way we want to take it in. We don't get to do this just when we feel like it. We get to do it every day, because it's like everything else. It's like giving our money and showing up for services and doing all the things that we do. So it needs to permeate everything that the parish is doing. And it always needs to be considered when you're thinking of what are we going to do now about whatever.
John Lake, a longtime member of our parish, asked, John thinks, and we have been, I've been preaching some about racial healing in the last year, and even before that. Our other two priests have as well. And John says, the sermons are great, but they only get us so far.
Right.
What about the role, Dr. Meeks, for creating smaller groups in which stories are shared?
Yeah.
I assume you think that's a good idea.
I think anything that we're doing to open up people's hearts to one another, whether it's having a picnic or a small group or reading a book or going on a pilgrimage, it's all a part of a bigger fabric of whatever we've got to do to remove the barriers inside of ourselves that keep us from being able to reach out to people who are different from us. And I don't mean that we do some perfunctory stuff that tries to make us look better. I'm talking about having a heart that really is willing to be disturbed when you hear about a little brown child being taken at the border, that you sit in grief about it because your heart is open, even though you can't do anything about it. I'm talking about an internal transformation that makes it possible to have real empathy that is disturbing, because part of the reason why we run from empathy is because it's disturbing. It will be unsettling. It's unsettling to hold other people's grief in your heart. So it's got to be genuine, and it's got to be from inside out that we make the transforming journey. And so we need sermons, we need classes, we need pilgrimages, we need book studies, we need conversations, storytelling. We need everything everything that we can, every tool that we can use to go where we need to go. And that needs to be the attitude that the parish has.
What is your fast advice for the vestry? Mm-hmm. We just installed elected four new members of our vestry. It's a really devoted and hardworking group. Mm-hmm. What advice would you give them?
I think that one of the most important things that the vestry should do is spend a good bit of time really understanding who everybody is that's on the vestry. Spend some time really getting deeper into one another's soul journeys, and then seeing what God says to you about how your leadership ought to look based upon what you find when you start going into this underground work inside yourselves as a vestry. Because you only lead people as far as you're willing to go. So if you want to lead your parish, your cathedral toward more depth and more creating spaces for transformation, then the vestry is going to have to do that for itself in order to be willing to go to lead others. And it takes a while, and particularly when you get new people. So I would suggest that vestry people do something like read a book together, see films together, go on retreat together, do whatever, have a storytelling circle, whatever it takes to get deeper with each other, and then see how you can generalize that into the larger community. And then as it works within the parish, then you generalize it into the outer community, because it's not rocket science. It's a matter of putting your toe in the water and watching the Red Sea part, and then take a few more steps. And the more courageous you become, the more land you get to walk on.
Dr. Meeks, I am so grateful. I'm going to thank you for one thing. I could thank you for so much more. I told you a week ago I was going to ask you 7 questions, and I asked you 41 questions. So thank you for your patience and your generosity. Thank you so much.
It's good to be with you all. And I have a good friend, Lynn Huber, who lives in Denver, and we've been in contact with each other. And she had said she couldn't be present right now, but she'll be watching the recording later. So I want to say hello to her. And I also want to say thank you very much for inviting me to be a small part of your journey there. And please don't hesitate to call upon me and the center in any way that we can help you.
We will. I hope our paths cross many times in the future. God bless Absalom Jones Episcopal Center. God bless you. And thank you for your time. And for all who are joining us, we've got 1 minute, Dr. Meeks, to get to church.
All right.
Well, service of Holy Eucharist begins in a minute. Same place, sjcathedral.org. Come pray with us. Take care.
Take good care. Blessings. Bye.
Bye.